Hi, I'm Diane McGarry with Drake at Arts. With me today are co-host Tom McGarry, author James R. Benn, and ASL interpreter Julia. Jim is best known for his Billy Boyle World War II mystery series. My husband just finished reading the books. He was so enthralled. He found writing this mystery series brought him an immense amount of joy, enabling him to meet people from all over the world and this country, listening to the reactions, feedback, and most importantly, their own stories. Having grown up in Connecticut, Jim attended the University of Connecticut and received his Master of Library Science from the Southern Connecticut State University. I love librarians, Jim, I have to tell you that. He is a member of the Mystery Writers of America and Authors Guild. He has worked in the library and information technology fields for over 35 years and quit the day job routine in 2011 to write full-time. Jim says he has learned two valuable lessons since he started writing, which have helped him greatly. And I hope I pronounced these women's names right. Mary Heaton Vorse said, "The art of writing is the art of applying the seat of one's pants to the chair." And novelist Rachel Basch told him, "The story has to come down as well as forward. Both sound simple, neither is." These are great quotes, Jim. How did you get started writing?
Well, I thought you might ask that. And to answer that, I have to tell you that I recently unboxed one of those boxes that you have in storage, in the attic or the back of your closet, that you don't actually remember what's in it. And I found the answer to your question.
Oh,
Cool.
Creative writing class, English creative writing class, freshman high school.
Oh
oh,
my gosh.
And I have the date, October 21st, 1963.
oof.
So
Oh,
I
wow.
know when I started
Mm.
because I have all these stories, most of which were ripped off from episodes of The Twilight Zone,
Mm.
or other TV shows. But this one I typed, and it must have been the last story of the semester. And I wrote a story about a spy an American soldier going ashore just before D-Day to scout out
Huh.
the landings. And I had sort of remembered the comment that I got from my English instructor. And he said, "A promising story, possibly too easy for the sergeant, but interesting." So what I remember from that is he told me that I had made it too easy for the protagonist of the story,
That's
which is
interesting.
a great writing lesson because writing fiction is all about putting obstacles in the place of your character and having them overcome it.
Mm.
So I still am a little miffed. All I got was a B plus. Uh, but that was a great lesson. And reading back on it, I can actually see a few little things that still crop up in my writing, a little phraseology here and there. So it was a great find to come across all these stories that
Wow.
Wow.
I had a lot of fun writing. And why I kept these all these years, I don't know.
Mm.
But, so to answer your question, how did I get started? Well,
Mm.
freshman class in high school. Then I did nothing about writing for about 40 years.
Huh.
A little gap in my writing resume. I did go to the movies in 1972 to see the premiere of The Godfather.
Hmm.
I'd always loved gangster movies, and I was struck by something in that film. If you remember, the opening scene of The Godfather is Sonny's wedding party. It's August 1945,
Mm.
and Michael Corleone, who is the white sheep in a family of black sheep, is there in his Marine Corps captain's uniform, the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for bravery, around his neck. And nobody's paying attention to this guy
Mm.
because he's not part of the Sicilian mafia. He's the one who wanted to go straight. Everybody else is in civilian clothes. There's no other soldiers in uniform. Any other garden party in August 1945, he would have been the center of attention. Everybody would have been gathered around him, asking him about his stories. And it struck me that there was that grit between the familial connections there. It was really interesting. And I had a moment of thinking, what if it had been Sonny that had gone into the service, and what would that have been like? So once again, I did nothing about that idea for decades, but I remembered it.
You're getting good at this.
Right. And finally, there's a story about how that came to be. But when I started writing seriously at age 50, I reached back to that 1972 movie and decided, well, since they already had taken up the Sicilians and crime families, I could go to Boston, because I'm Irish American, Boston police force, and just put that whole dynamic to work for me, where it's a family of Boston cops who owe their allegiance to each other, to the notion of a free Ireland, and to the fiefdom that they have built up in the Boston Police Department. And my character, Billy Boyle, is my version of Sonny going off to join the army.
Wow.
So he's the fish out of water, and he comes from a family that really doesn't want to be part of this whole conflict, because in their eyes, it's just another war to save the British Empire, and they're Irish nationalists, so don't want any part of it. So anyway, that's a long-winded way of how I got into this, and the memories that I carried along for the decades that I was preparing to actually write.
Well, that's
Which is
interesting.
another way of saying not doing anything about writing.
Well, sometimes things have to percolate.
They do, yeah.
And you said in 63, you had this creative writing class. Well,
Yes.
that's the year that one of our presidents got assassinated, is it not?
Yes, exactly, yeah.
And so did Kennedy and the PT 109 or anything like that come forward for you when you're thinking about
No, it didn't. As I said, I was paying homage to the Twilight Zone, is one way to say it. So a lot of these stories, you'd watch the Twilight Zone on Thursday or Friday night.
Oh, I remember.
Yeah, and then do a little twist on it. But no, although JFK makes it into the Billy Boyle books, he didn't make it into ninth grade creative writing.
Well, I was wondering if that impetus came forward as well as Sonny when you were starting to write, especially since you were talking about Irish Americans.
No,
Not really, I can tell.
I did learn a lot about the Kennedy family writing the book that he appears in. So that was a revelation.
Yeah. That's so neat. So we're not done until we're done is the other thing, that lesson that you're bringing forward, right? Because a lot of people think, oh, I didn't do this earlier, I can't ever do it, but that's not true.
No, and it may be that I wouldn't have had the wherewithal to start writing until the time was right, and I hadn't even realized it. So I mentioned I started writing when I was 50. On my 50th birthday, my wife and I went on a hiking trip in Germany. And it was one of these inn-to-inn things, and you go up and they take your luggage around. And we were in Germany, in the Harz Mountains. And we were doing some not climbing, just hiking in hills. And we came, no, I should back up. The evening before we started hiking was my actual birthday. So we went out to dinner, and we were on a terrace in a restaurant overlooking a valley. It's very beautiful. I had a big stein of beer ready to go. And my wife, who is a psychotherapist, decided it was time to talk about feelings. And she asked me, well, what do you want to do with the next 50 years of your life? And it struck me.
What a question.
Yeah. And we would not, if she didn't ask that question that day, we might not be doing this today. Because what I realized is I had always wanted to see if I could write a book. So I said that. I said, I think I want to write a book. I don't know how, but I want to see if I can do it. And by that, I meant think of a story, write from page 1 to page whatever, conclude it, and just see if I can do that. So we talked about that for a while, and I had zero idea of what the plot would be or what it would be about. So now the next day we're hiking. We've been hiking all day. We're taking this route back to the village. We're going up, not a mountain, but a pretty steep hill. And we're on a path, and we see a signpost that points to a German military cemetery. And so we thought that's pretty interesting. Let's go take a look. And the Harz Mountains was the location of some of the last days of the fighting in World War II. So as we get to this cemetery, it's very small, a few hundred graves at most. And it's a path. It's not on a roadway. It's a path off a hiking trail. And there's a lot of grave markers, and the birth and death dates tell us that they're basically either 16 or 60. So these are young boys, old men that had been thrown into the fight in the last few days. But then off to the side of the cemetery, there's a separate section, and it's got a monument, and carved into the monument in German are the words, "For the unknown Russians." And there was a line of gravestones that all said "unknown Russian" in German.
Whoa.
Which was odd right there. I mean, that you don't mix in military cemeteries, you don't mix sides or nationalities. But what was really strange was that each of the graves of the Russians had a small potted geranium set down in front of it.
Oh my gosh.
And now we had been hiking. We were out of breath getting up there. So the first question was, why are there Russians in this cemetery? And who brought the flowers up? 60 at this point, 60 years after the end of the war. So voila, I had the plot for the first book I was going to write. And the Billy Boyle character was, he was in the first draft, but I changed his name, but the essence of him was created in that book. And it all came about due to that question and due to just taking that trail, that little side trail, and finding that cemetery.
You remind me of Robert Frost, the trail. Like
yeah.
Yours led to a cemetery and a career change that you didn't expect or anticipate.
Absolutely.
That's wonderful. So you really like the genre that you use. Was there any debate about what other type of writing you might do, or if you might do a different style?
I actually did do a little bit of a business plan. The first book was titled On Desperate Ground, and it was more of a thriller. And as I said, the character of Billy Boyle, although I wisely changed his name because I realized I wanted to do something with him at the beginning of the war, and this book was set at the very end of the war. But when I decided I want to make it a mystery and have this Billy Boyle Irish-American character, I did do some research into what genres of mysteries were selling the best. And historical mysteries had just started to get really, really hot. And there were, at that time, historical mysteries set in medieval times, in ancient Egypt, the American Civil War, but there were only a couple of series set during the Second World War. That was an area of interest for me, and it seemed like fertile ground at the time. And that's changed over the last 20 years, that there's been more and more of them. But at the time, it seemed like a solid decision that was a match between an opening in the marketplace and interests of mine.
What type of librarian were you?
I started off as a public library director in Connecticut, and then worked at the Connecticut State Library. I worked for a while at the National Commission for Libraries and Information Science. I actually helped Al Gore invent the internet.
Oh, wow.
Now, he didn't invent the internet, but when I was working for this national commission, it was at the very early stages of the internet. And we did work with Gorse Senate staff to write libraries into a bill that would establish the very first connections between major educational institutions and got them to include libraries in that. So that's a claim to fame.
Oh, good for you guys.
Well, that's really an important
Yeah.
thing. It changes everything when you do something like that. The connectivity makes such a difference.
And
That's
really, it wasn't all that long ago, and nobody had much of a concept of how we were going to use this thing. So
yeah.
it was a pretty interesting process. And then I ended up, see, the thing about writing is you don't have to get up and drive to work. And I was always, I had a lot of jobs in the library field, library automation field. And as I look back, I think I could get bored pretty quickly at a job because I wasn't doing something I truly, truly loved doing. So once I retired a little early, it was like, all right, this is the way to work. Just sit home, sit at the typewriter, the keyboard, look out the window, not have to go to work.
Well, but you must do a lot of research for your books.
Oh, it's work, but it's not going to the office and putting on a tie work.
Not putting on a tie.
Say a little about how you do your research. Do you travel to places, or do online, or call people, or letters, or what?
It's changed over time. We have done a number of trips to Europe. They've been very helpful. The third book in this series was set in Sicily, and going to Sicily was a real eye-opener in terms of everything from the terrain to the people. It was very helpful. We've been to London. And now I think I use the internet and interlibrary loan more than anything else. What I like to do is read into an area that I want to explore and then find something to hook onto in what may be a story that's not very well known. For instance, I was reading a book a few years ago about the different resistance movements in Europe, and I found a footnote. It was not even in the full text, but a footnote that described a Zionist youth group smuggling Jewish children into Switzerland.
Wow.
And what struck me is that they were talking about not smuggling out of Nazi Germany or occupied France, but smuggling into Switzerland, and how difficult that was. And that led to more and more information about the Swiss role in the Second World War, how anti-Semitic they were, how much they didn't want, and it does sound familiar, didn't want refugees coming into their country. That became a book in of itself. So what I'm always looking for is that hook, that thing that people may not have heard of in a larger context, and tell a story around that. I've been lucky to talk to a number of World War II vets over the years. Actually, it's been several years since I have, because they're just passing away and getting so much older. But when I started writing, I had several friends that would say, "Oh, my uncle or my grandfather never talked about the war, but he said he'd talk to you because it would help you." And that was the entree in a couple of cases for families to hear stories that they had never heard before about their family members. So that was fascinating. And I've tried to weave those stories into the books as best I can.
Do you think our society has changed where we're willing to listen to people who've had these types of traumas when they come home? Because really, to me, what part of what's happening is that these older gentlemen have had a trauma, a severe trauma that's different, and they want to leave it behind, right? My father spent a lot of time trying to understand Vietnam vets, for instance, and what he came up with, and I don't know if it's true or not, but when his thought was he and his buddies came home in a group and they had the time on the ship to decompress and to support each other and to understand, either verbally talking or not even talking, just like looks back and forth, they'd all been in the same place. They knew what each had gone through, and they had the time. They had the gift of time before they came back here. And now it's an instant for some people. And especially when they're doing drone things, I mean, you just walk out of the building and you're no longer there. So do you have any feelings or opinions about that?
Well, I think it's dramatically different. Also, when you think about the fact that today a soldier can be on the battlefield and zooming seconds later with his family. I mean, that has to be pretty strange.
Yeah.
But you're right. There are so many things that are different. Just looking at the soldiers in Europe during World War II, they were part of a massive group that was very self-contained. So it chimes in on what you're saying, is that they were part of something together. And then when that was over, they went back together for the most part. Now, there were a lot of difficulties reintegrating because so one thing I find interesting is the notion of how self-censoring GIs were, even in their letters home. Even the war correspondents that wrote about how bad it was still censored themselves because it was so bad. It was so horrible. And at some point, I think they did need to talk about that. And I saw a glimpse of that in the guys that talked to me, because it was like pulling teeth at first. You know, you'd ask them a question and be, yep, nope. That was it. But then finally, once we established some kind of camaraderie, a small example is this actually happened by chance, but my wife and I were visiting my brother-in-law in the hospital. He was about to have heart surgery, which turned out fine, but we went to visit him beforehand, room with another guy, and they had, my sister-in-law and her husband had told this other fellow that I was a writer. Turned out he was in the 101st Airborne in World War II. So when we got there, both families were there, and they were all friendly. We were chatting. I started talking to this guy, and he had a million stories about all the fun he had. Yeah, he talked about going AWOL with his brother into Paris and stealing an officer's uniform and having a great time. But it was like hearing stories at summer camp. And finally, there was about a dozen people in the room. Everybody else sort of drifted to the window, and they started talking with each other. And I stayed by this guy's bedside, chatted with him, and finally, he looked around to see that his family was at the other side of the room, and he went like this to have me come closer. And he said, "They always ask me if I killed anyone, and I tell them I didn't, but I did." So this was maybe 10 years ago. So that's how long he held that secret in. And he just had that one moment where he could find a way to tell somebody. And keep it away from his family. So, well, on that cheery note, what we're talking about next?
No. I mean, I can't imagine expecting someone to go to war and not killing someone. I would just assume that they came back so someone else didn't. You know, and it's
Well, those are the kind of questions that I think would have opened up the floodgates if he answered it truthfully. And he may have been protecting his family from seeing him and seeing how scarred he was emotionally.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I try to do in each book is insert something that's true emotionally about the experience of these men and women who went off to war. And hopefully people can take that away, as well as having some entertainment.
So in a way, you're trying to heal people with what you're
Well, if
doing.
that or educate, create some awareness, because I doubt there's many World War II vets reading these books at this point in time. But if their
No.
family members can, then that's helpful.
Yeah. But also war is war, Jim.
Yeah.
And if you can see it on one side, then it might be easier for some people to read about where the time period you're writing about than their own.
Right.
Still. That's really neat.
Yeah, my dad was in World War II, but in the China, Burma, India theater. But
Mine too.
nevertheless, yep.
Yeah. Do you know
And
where he was stationed?
I don't know exactly, but he didn't really talk about it much, except he was instrumental in keeping the Burma Road open. You know, the road wasn't just a single physical road, but it was the infrastructure to keep the jeeps and the trucks rolling. And because the Japanese controlled a lot of resources, they had to improvise alternatives just to keep the transport running. So even though it's a different theater, somehow the stuff I read of yours just resonates. So maybe he had to deal with stuff like that, or maybe that was what it was like for him.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, on this, I hate to cut this short, but it's been wonderful and fascinating talking with you, Jim. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for the opportunity.
And to hear more of Jim's works, please join us for his reading and Q&A during our March Arts Saturday. Register on Eventbrite. And please be sure to thank our many sponsors for making these programs possible. Their donations help us keep doing this. Please tell them thank you and consider being a sponsor yourself. Am I showing the wrong thing?
You're showing your script, sweetie.
Okay, stop the share. That's not what I wanted to say. Good grief, where'd it go? Here we go. There we go.
There we go. That's the benefactors.
I was saying the other thing. Oh, goodness gracious me. Anyway, to become a sponsor and receive more information about our Arts Saturdays or other programs, please email us at drakeatarts@gmail.com or visit our website, drakeatarts.com. This and all our programs are archived on the Drake at Arts YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/@drakeatarts. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.